In my personal experience, and I've covered this in ample detail in my talks and articles, I find Devdutt's writings to be very shallow. They have a very superficial understanding of Hindu scriptures, of Hindu works, and Hindu traditions, and a lot of distortions. Subhodeep begins with what Devdutt talks about when he discusses Dharma. Namo. I'm pleased to offer my views on the chapter on Devdutt Pattanaik in the just being released book, 10 Heads of Ravana. This chapter has been authored by Subhodeep Mukhopadhyay, and I must congratulate him for the thorough study he has done of Devdutt Pattanaik's writings, tweets, articles, books, and presented a Purva Paksha with many references from Indian and Western works to corroborate his critique of what he calls Devduttology. 6 years back, I had written an article on the book My Gita by Devdutt Pattanaik, and the title of the article was not just his Gita, it's Pattanaik's own fantasy world. And the study of that fantasy world is probably Devduttology. So, Deconstructing Devduttology, an apt title for this chapter. As Subhodeep points out, Devdutt Pattanaik is immensely popular. He continues to be. He's authored over 50 books, many of which are bestsellers. And he's considered a modern day authority on Hinduism. In my personal experience, and I've covered this in ample detail in my talks and articles, I find Devdutt's writings to be very shallow. They have a very superficial understanding of Hindu scriptures, of Hindu works, and Hindu traditions, and a lot of distortions. Subhodeep begins with what Devdutt talks about when he discusses Dharma. So he contrasts the definitions of Dharma as given in the Mahabharata, which says, Dharanat Dharma Ityahu. So Dharma is what sustains the society. And look at Devdutt's definition of Dharma. So what Devdutt says is that Dharma has been made out to be a complicated word. That way you can call anything Dharma. Dharma is potential, the best of what anything or anyone can do, which is such a distorted definition of Dharma. And what I particularly liked about Subhodeep's critique is somebody who's, what about somebody like a terrorist who's realizing his full potential? Will you call it Dharma? Of course not. So, such a definition of Dharma is just a figment of Devdutt's imagination. As Subhodeep rightly mentions, potential is not a standard definition, is not found in any of the major Sanskrit dictionaries. No Sanskrit dictionary gives potential as a meaning of Dharma. And things like these, for example, Pattanaik says, neither violence nor non-violence is Dharma. Dharma is a thought, not an action. Again, as Subhodeep rightly mentions, only violence in specific circumstances, for example, when Krsna exhorted Arjuna to fight the Kurukshetra war for the sake of Dharma, only that is Dharma. Otherwise, it is Ahimsa Paramo Dharma, as the Mahabharata puts it. Ahimsa, non-violence, is a supreme Dharma. To ignore this nuance and dumb it down to saying things like neither violence nor non-violence is Dharma is very typical of Devdutt Pattanaik. There are things which need to be simplified, but simplification is not dumbing down. And what Devdutt Pattanaik does is to dumb down things for his audience, his gallery, which is as Subhodeep rightly mentions on page 118, the English-speaking urban Hindu elites who have a superficial knowledge of Hindu darshanas and sampradayas. That's the target audience that Devdutt has. And unfortunately, this is a growing audience, and it is our duty to reach out to them with critiques like these, with Purva Paksha analysis like these in English. Subhodeep further mentions things like Pattanaik agrees with the view that Lord Rama's obsession with rules dehumanized him. And look at the kind of language that Devdutt uses. That Ram always follows the rule makes him dependable. You know what to expect from him. That's a good quality too. It also means that around him there'll be Sitas who'll suffer. There's such a perfunctory reading, such a shallow reading of our texts, all nuance gone. in his HRD-driven approach, as Subhodeep mentions. Further down in the chapter, Subhodeep talks about pramanas, and he mentions what Devdutt calls myth. And an important thing that Subhodeep brings out is that we never talk about Christian myths. We never talk about, and I can add from my experience, we never talk about Muslim myths. For example, splitting of the moon, or Muhammad's journey on a winged steed. They are never talked about in terms of as Islamic myths, but it's always Hindu myths. If you look at Buddhism, even Buddhist texts have supernatural feats. For example, the Ambatta Suttam in the Tipitaka mentions that Buddha had 32 marks of a realized person, fully realized person. And two of them he displayed to Ambatta. One of them I can't talk about right now. It has to be read. The other one is that Buddha had such a long tongue that he showed that mark to Ambatta by stretching out his tongue, touching both the ears, both the nostrils, and then covering his forehead. So such supernatural feats, and we find a lot of them in the Buddhist lore, in the Tipitaka, in the Mahayana tradition, but they are never talked about as Buddhist myths. The narrative is that Buddhism is a rational religion and Hinduism is a religion full of myths, and that narrative is also furthered by Devdutt Pattanaik and other similar writers. So, as Subhodeep says, Pattanaik does not see the continuity between the past and present when it comes to analyzing Hinduism solely through the lens of mythology. Then on nationhood, so Devdutt Pattanaik says that ideas such as nation state are secular myths. Nation states are secular myths. I'm not sure how many of our own countrymen would agree with it. India, or Bharat, has been a civilizational state for a long time, and it has been recognized as a geographical state also. When Megasthenes wrote Indica, he was referring to a geographical entity as a civilizational state. So Devdutt writes things like, when somebody imagines one idea of India, they're really not scientific. They are poets with a control freak trait. And Subhodeep then critiques this, that when Darius the First talked about India, or when Megasthenes talked about India in his Indica, they were referring to a civilizational state. Another gem from Devdutt: Indian culture is like a masala box. This is the kind of dumbing down that Devdutt Pattanaik is very good at. Something as profound, as deep, as ancient as Indian culture, as serious a topic, has been compared to a masala box. Because probably that's what Devdutt can think about. It's a masala box. It's for people who want to watch masala movies, who want to read masala books, who want to read masala philosophy. This is the perfect masala author. Indian culture is like a masala box. And then he says indigenous challenges such as rise of Buddhism. So I don't know where this confusion comes from, that Buddhism was an indigenous challenge. No, Buddhism was as much Arya as it could be. In fact, the Buddha himself said his way is the Arya Magga, or the Arya Marga. He said that in fact, one of the meanings of the word Arya is Buddhist, as per standard dictionaries. So the concept of Arya Magga or Arya Dhamma, the Arya Dharma or the Arya Marga, is very much present in Buddhism. Pali or Ardhamagadhi, or Ardhamagadhi of the Jainas, or Magadhi of Buddha, which is often referred to as Pali, are languages which are very similar to Sanskrit. Somebody who knows Sanskrit can easily understand Pali and Magadhi and Ardhamagadhi. These are very similar languages. The concept of Arya is very much present in Buddhism. So why is it an indigenous challenge to the dominant Aryans? Why is it presented like that? In fact, Buddhism has the same. In fact, even untouchability is accepted by Buddhism. We have Buddhist suttas talking about Hinakulas, the low families or the low clans. For example, the Chandalas, the Venukaras, the Rathakaras, the Pulkasas. So, when it comes to caste, there have been scholarly studies which say that both from India and abroad, which state with proofs that the Buddha did not denounce caste as we believe today, as a lot of people believe today. In fact, he accepted the caste is not the right word to use, but he accepted the varna or the kola vyavastha. He in fact proposed an alternative interpretation where he placed the kshatriyas above the brahmins, and there were some hina kulas or hina jatis who were considered inferior, even in the writings of Buddha, even in the Tipitaka, even in the Mahayana works. So all these things are known in the scholarly world. Unfortunately, we have a lot of shallow readings and misunderstandings prevalent in popular culture, and Devdutt Pattanaik is one example. Further, Subhodeep brings about the Brahmin-phobia or Brahmin-misia of Devdutt Pattanaik, where he blames Brahmins for making the system rigid. And in Pattanaik's works, the Brahmins dehumanized people, denied them human dignity and access to common resources like water and education. So all the blame of all the caste system, or so-called caste system, because caste is not the exact translation of varna or jati, but all the ills of the caste hierarchy or the varna hierarchy or jati hierarchy and the discrimination are blamed on, are put on, all the blame is put on Brahmins, whereas many scholarly writings have pointed out that this was a social construct. This was a construct present even in the Harappan civilization and even in Buddhism. To blame just the Brahmins for the jati or varna vyavastha is a very shallow and narrow-minded view. In fact, an agenda-driven view, if I would to put it mildly. Now, passport to distort. There's an interesting section where Subhodeep points out the distortions of Devdutt Pattanaik. Another thing is where he confounds Hindutva, Hinduism, and Advaita. For example, as Subhodeep mentioned on page 137, at one place Devdutt mentions that Advaita Vedanta is the de facto philosophy followed by Hindutva. And then he says that Advaita Vedanta is the foundation of Hinduism. That's a relatively new idea with thinkers like Dayananda Saraswati. So at one point he equates, at one place he equates Advaita Vedanta with Hindutva. At one point he equates Advaita Vedanta with Hinduism as a relatively new thought. Mentions Dayananda Saraswati, who does not subscribe to Advaita, by the way. And then he says that Hinduism is not Hindutva, but both are Advaita Vedanta. So all this is immense confusion. As Subhodeep rightly mentions, Advaita is one of the many streams thriving in the Hindu ecosystem, and non-dualism is seen in numerous sampradayas, including different post-Shankara Vedanta schools, such as Kashmir Shaivism and many tantric schools. So all this nuance is gone, and we have a masala mix of Devduttology served to you. Subhodeep then mentions things like Kadru and Vinata. So reading conflict in Kadru and Vinata, that's I think Devdutt reads a lot in many things. So all that is pointed out effectively. I'm impressed with the number of references that Subhodeep has cited. It's a well written chapter, and the core texts of, for example, I've been cited, and when I've said that when Devdutt Pattanaik talks about the Gita, he has trivialized the core text, one of the core texts of Hindu philosophy, to a deficient caricature. I wrote this 6 years ago. I stand by it even today, every word of it, and Subhodeep cites it at the end of his chapter. So there are more things which I can talk about, but unfortunately we have a time limit. So I've been asked to wrap this up in 10 to 15 minutes. So we will conclude with the pitfalls of blindly believing Devdutt Pattanaik, and that's what this chapter brings up successfully. I wish this book all the success and good and wide readership that it deserves. This chapter number 4, Devdutt Pattanaik, Deconstructing Devduttology by Subhodeep Mukhopadhyay. I've read it end to end from the beginning to the last word. I've gone through the references. It's a well-written chapter, and I hope this gets the wide audience it deserves. With that, I conclude my address. Namo.